Futurists of the 1960s and 70s dreamt of flying cars and orbiting hotels, but only a handful would forecast that computer networks would help define human progress for the next century. To understand the Internet's genesis in detail, we have to return to a point in history where technology was about to irrevocably change the destiny of humanity. New Mexico, July 16, 1945. It was here that the world's first atomic bomb was detonated and thrust humanity into an age of nuclear weaponry, an age where the continued existence of mankind was no longer assured. At the conclusion of the Second World War, the United States alone had possessed the bomb and was set to exercise total military dominance over the entire planet. Unbeknownst to many in the U.S. intelligence community, the Soviet Union had already infiltrated America's nuclear research program, and in 1949 they produced their own aircraft deliverable atomic bomb. The greatest single contest in the 20th century had begun, the Cold War. This arms race would propel technical achievement to such a height that the next 70 years would accomplish far more than the previous 6,000. The United States and Soviet Union both sought to become the world hegemon, and to have their ideology become the defining political worldview. Previous superpowers such as the French and British empires relied on colonization and military conquest to project their influence. The Cold War was going to be very different. With the presence of nuclear weapons, this contest needed to remain an ideological and technological one. Scientific and military achievement would be used to demonstrate national prowess, because any direct conflict could risk the annihilation of all mankind. The atomic bombs used on Japan were experimental wartime prototypes. This made them very heavy and physically quite large. Later design improvements allowed for some miniaturization, but the bombs still relied on a cumbersome bomber aircraft for delivery to the target. Nuclear bombers must be flown from specialized airfields and operate along predictable flight paths, and this makes them extremely vulnerable to intercept. As a result, this early form of nuclear warfare would involve two types of combat aircraft: bombers to deliver nuclear weapons, and interceptors to destroy the bombers before they reach their assigned targets. Both nations committed enormous amounts of money and research in an effort to increase the payload, endurance, and speed of their military aircraft. Our modern air travel ecosystem, where you can safely voyage to any place on Earth in under 24 hours, is the ultimate result of those expenditures. To prevent a nuclear-equipped enemy from flying over the North Pole and vaporizing major population centers, a new defense paradigm for the nuclear age was needed. The end result is known by many names, such as the Nash equilibrium or the Mexican standoff, but the moniker military planners chose, MAD, or Mutually Assured Destruction, was the most descriptive. MAD encompasses the belief that when both sides have the ability to completely annihilate their opponent, no one will be foolish enough to attack. The late Dr. Carl Sagan compared the MAD doctrine to having two mortal enemies standing waist-deep in gasoline, one holding 3 matches and the other with 5. In order to exercise the MAD strategy, all participants must maintain technological parity and never allow their opponent to gain advantage in speed or countermeasure. If one side does possess an advantage, they can completely obliterate their enemy before any counterattack can be mustered. This standoff would continue to maintain the peace as long as all involved used weapon systems with near equal performance characteristics. But the Soviet Union was about to bring an exciting new toy to the party. On October 4, 1957, the peoples of the world were shocked to discover that the Soviet Union had placed the world's first artificial satellite into Earth orbit. From a technological standpoint, Sputnik 1 was an unremarkable radio transmitter stuffed into a small spherical enclosure, but from a military perspective, it demonstrated a terrifyingly new ballistic missile lifting capability. Ballistics is the science of accurately predicting the flight paths of things like arrows, bullets, and rockets. To understand how the ballistic missile works, we can use the classic thought experiment known as Newton's cannonball that demonstrates how a cannonball fired from any angle would eventually return to Earth by gravity. However, if fired fast enough, the speed of the ball would counteract the pull of gravity and cause the ball to orbit the Earth. This is the advantage of the ballistic missile. It arrives from space at a speed of over 7 kilometers per second, making it indefensible. Sputnik and astronaut Yuri Gagarin had both demonstrated that the Soviet Union had developed the Intercontinental Ballistic Missile, or ICBM, and with it they could deliver nuclear weapons to American cities in less than 30 minutes. When MAD was based on bomber aircraft, it was likely that large numbers of bombers would be destroyed before ever reaching their targets, and any attack would take several hours to arrive, giving ample time for civil defense preparations. The ICBM, however, afforded no such mercy, as it would be as difficult to intercept as an asteroid from outer space. The previous bomber and interceptor paradigm would be retired in favor of a new Ballistic Missile Early Warning System, or BMEWS. It was hoped that this system could detect an attack fast enough to provide the president with the time needed to order a counterstrike. The necessity of retaliation was critical, because an intercept of an ICBM was impossible, thus making a swift counterstrike the only deterrent against a surprise attack. Later advances in submarine-launched missiles would dramatically reduce the reaction time to less than 7 minutes, and placing several multi-megaton warheads on a single missile would make any lapse in response catastrophic. The initial bomber threat demanded that early warning systems be placed along the maritime borders of North America, and that those radar installations be linked to a central point using conventional telephone lines and radios. That radar data then flowed into what are known as direction centers for military commanders to direct bomber intercept and counterattack missions. This centralized defense system was known as the SAGE, or Semi-Automatic Ground Environment. The SAGE direction centers had powerful computers that would combine information from many separate radars and produce a single picture that represented the overall battle environment. Ultimately, this network would be linked to deep underground command centers, such as the Cheyenne Mountain Complex in Colorado, in an attempt to give at least some physical protection from a direct hit. When the SAGE mission focused on the interception of bomber aircraft, it performed exceptionally well, but with the introduction of the ICBM, the limitations of SAGE communication links became apparent. The reliance on the nationwide public telephone network to carry this information made the entire system extremely vulnerable to interruption. If even a few major cities were destroyed by nuclear attack, large portions of the radar data would be undeliverable to the direction centers. A number of airborne, satellite, and terrestrial radio solutions were developed to provide some backup, but they also proved to have their own shortcomings. Fortunately, a more elegant solution was being developed by military scientists at the Advanced Research Projects Agency, or ARPA. They proposed using a new digital, packet-switched network approach. When radar information was generated at the antenna site, it would be converted from digital into a sound wave using a modem so that it could travel over the existing public telephone network. When it reached the direction center, this sound wave would be converted back into digital data so that it could be processed by the defense computer. This modem modulation allowed for digital targeting information to be carried over many different kinds of waveforms, from telephone lines to radio and microwave links. This new specification also required that every site maintain several links to other partner sites, as opposed to the original single direct connection approach. The information itself would also be divided into many small chunks called packets, and each packet contained information such as where it came from and where it needed to go. Every site on the network would then be assigned a unique address, and also provided with the addresses of all the other sites, including the ones they had no direct connections with. Most importantly, they were all required to relay packets that they received for other sites further downstream, even if that required handling packets that were not intended for them. There are significant advantages to using this approach, the first being what is known as fault tolerance, meaning that the network is capable of functioning even when something has gone terribly wrong. Unlike the previous direct connection mechanism, if physical damage or connection problems occurred, this packet switch system could choose an alternate path around the malfunction and still deliver packets to their destination. Moreover, by encoding data as packets, as opposed to only analog waves, many of the problems with poor quality wires and long-distance radio systems can be overcome. People have been using radio waves to send information since the dawn of radio in 1906, but this new combination of modulating digital packets into waves changed everything. Modulation of digital data into sound and the use of carrier waves will introduce interference, and occasionally it is so intense that it damages portions of the original message. A classic example of this is tuning into a weak radio station on your car stereo. You hear the music, but also static interference. The portion of the sound you actually want, the music, is called the signal, and everything else is considered noise. The wave can therefore be expressed as a ratio of signal to noise. The higher the signal, the clearer the music can be heard. Our brains are extraordinary at focusing on a single portion of sound and ignoring everything else. We have all experienced hearing our name mentioned in a room full of conversations. This is called selectivity, and it is something that computers have considerable difficulty with whenever the noise is much higher than the signal. To overcome this, the data is divided into many small packets, and each packet is given what is known as a checksum and a sequence number. The checksum function allows each packet's accuracy to be verified so that nothing is lost from the original message. If any packets are corrupted because of high noise ratios, the receiver would be able to detect it and reject the damaged packets. In situations where packets are corrupted, the sender uses what is known as the automatic repeat request, or ARQ. Using this mechanism, the sender retains a copy of the packet after sending it, and waits to hear an acknowledgement from the destination station. During normal conditions, the destination station will reply with an acknowledgement packet containing the original packet's sequence number. This notifies the sender that everything has arrived correctly. If the sending station fails to receive an acknowledgement within a given amount of time, it assumes that there has been some packet loss and resends the original data until it is finally acknowledged by the destination. Because packets can take many different paths along a network to avoid damaged portions, the packets themselves can arrive out of their original order. This is where the sequence number is useful, as it allows the destination to reassemble the total message from many fragments and to report any loss back to the sender for retransmission. The end result of all this information science is a communication system that guarantees completely reliable exchange of data over a noisy, damaged, and ever-changing environment. The importance of this achievement cannot be overstated, and it should be ranked alongside other great achievements such as the printing press and the airplane. Now you have some understanding of how a YouTube video is carried over billions of wires across the planet and delivered to the backseat of a moving car, all without a single pixel being misplaced. It's really quite astounding.